Chapter 5. Public Affairs During the Childhood and Youth of Jesus. Judah. When Jesus was born, Herod was near his end, perishing of an incurable disease. His reign had been one of oppression and terror to the Jews, but so skillful a politician was he that no combination had been able to break his influence at Rome. He continued his crimes up to the very day of his death. He had slain his wife on suspicion that Mariamne, whom he so loved that after her death he would go howling for her through his palace. He had slain his two sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, and just before he died, he slew a third son, Antipater. He had outraged the religious sentiments of the Jews. He had built a theater in the holy city. He had introduced Roman games in which the gladiators and the wild beasts fought. He had put up the golden eagle over the gate of the temple, probably about the time he had inscribed the name of Agrippa over the gate. The Jews regarded this as a breach of the second commandment. It was intolerable to them. It was an abomination of desolation. At the instigation of two rabbis, there was an uprising, and on a false report of the death of Herod, the young men of the city tore down the hated thing in open daylight. Herod caused the rabbis to be burnt alive, the high priest Matthias to be deposed, and Joazar to take his place. And, of course, the no graven image thing was taking it towards the latter thing, but surely there was secular entertainment of some sort, even of a sinful nature. So, but they should have dealt with themselves first before they tried to deal with the Romans. That was why they remained unsuccessful, right? At least at this period. This, in brief, was the state of affairs in Jerusalem when Herod died, as related at large by Josephus, Antiquities, Book 17. To understand the history of the times of Jesus, we must know the condition of the Jews and the course of the rulers, of whom members of the family of Herod were chief in the first year of Jesus. We need only notice the children of the first 5 wives of Herod in a table adapted from Smith's New Testament history. 1. Before his accession to the throne, Herod married Doris, and her only son, Antipater, was the victim of his father's dying rage. Aristobulus, his eldest, son by Mariamne, the granddaughter of Hyrcanus, was the parent of a large family, and from him were descended 2 Agrippas, the first of whom was the King Herod, who slew James and imprisoned Peter. The second was the King Agrippa, before whom Paul pleaded. 3. After the murder of Mariamne, Herod married another Mariamne, daughter of the high priest Simon. Her son was Herod Philip, whose marriage with his niece Herodias, daughter of Aristobulus, followed by her divorce of him to marry his half-brother Herod Antipas, to whom she stood in the same relation, led to the martyrdom of John the Baptist. He is often confounded with his half-brother Philip, the tetrarch of Iturea, for his next wife, Malthaca, a Samaritan, was the mother of Herod Antipas and Archelaus. 5. By Cleopatra he had 2 sons, the younger of whom was Philip, the tetrarch of Iturea and the adjacent districts, with Trachonitis. 6. His other wives and their children are of no consequence in the history. These, well, I don't know about no consequence, but their support or lack of, and certainly some stories might be interesting. These Complicated relations will be made clearer by the following conspectus of the chief personages with whom the history is concerned for the 4 generations of the family. A. Herod the Great, so his wives, Doris, Mariamne, granddaughter of Hyrcanus II, Mariamne, daughter of Simon, 4. Malthaca, a Samaritan, 5. Cleopatra. In ancient Egyptian, we have the D sound, and we have the Q sound. So instead of the K, and instead of the T, D. But I don't remember what extra sounds compared to what we're used to. The sons of the first are Antipater. The sons of the second are Aristobulus and Alexander. The sons of the third, Herod Philip the First, Herodias, and we have Herod Antipas, but was it Mariamne or Malthaca? Because that... Okay, yeah, I guess it's Malthaca. Archelaus, also the son of the fourth, and Herod Philip II, mother Salome, daughter of Philip, and of Herodias. And the first 3 were executed by their father in his lifetime. Herod Philip I and Herod Antipas lived as... Herod lived as a private person. Herod Antipas was Tetrarch of Galilee. Archelaus, Ethnarch of Judea. Herod Philip, Tetrarch of northern Persia, etc. The children of Aristobulus: Herod Agrippa I, king of Judea, and Herodias, mother of Herod Philip I and Herod Antipas. And children of Herod Agrippa the First, Herod Agrippa II, the titular king, Tetrarch of northern Persia. Bernice, named in Acts 25:23. Drusilla, mother to Felix, named in Acts 24:24. Herod made a will in favor of the children of Malthaca, namely Herod Antipas and Archelaus. At first, Antipas was named as the successor, but the final codicil gave the succession to Archelaus. To Antipas was left the government of Galilee and Perea, with the title of Tetrarch. A lot of this will stuff is detrimental to families before and after death. One should have a will, but to Antipas was left the government of Galilee and Perea, the title of Tetrarch. In his domain, Jesus spent the larger portion of his life. To Herod Philip II was left the territory and government of Iturea, Gaulonitis, and Batnaa, with the title of Tetrarch. As soon as Herod's death was known, the soldiery were gathered together in the amphitheater. A letter from Herod was read, in which he thanked the army for their fidelity to him and exhorted them to be as faithful to Archelaus. Then the king's last testament was read, in which he named his successor. Archelaus was acclaimed king. He addressed himself at once to the discharge of his last filial duties. He took care that the funeral of his father should be most sumptuous. A golden bier embroidered with precious stones. Sorry about that. A golden bier embroidered with precious stones held the body, which was covered with purple. The dead monarch had a diadem upon his head, over which was a crown of gold. He also held a scepter in his right hand. The bier was surrounded by the sons and numerous relatives of the deceased. Next to these, the guard and band, dressed according to their nationalities: Thracians, Germans, Galatians. Then the whole army followed in the same manner as they used to go out to war, and as they used to be put in array by their muster-masters and centurions. These were followed by 500 of his domestics carrying spices, and so, says Josephus in his Antiquities, book 16, chapter 8, they went 8 furlongs to Herodium, for there by his own command he was to be buried. From Jericho, when Herod died, to Herodium, where he was buried, was a distance of 200 furlongs, and if the account of Josephus means that the procession moved at the rate of 8 furlongs a day, this pomp continued no less than 20 days. While Archelaus was thus publicly mourning for his father, he was said to be privately spending his nights in revelry. The mourning done, he went up to the temple, took a seat upon a throne of gold, spoke conciliatingly to the multitude, promised them everything, but declined to assume the crown until the will of his father had been ratified by Caesar. Archelaus' troubles in settling the succession. But almost immediately after, a sedition was raised in the city. The people began a lamentation for the 2 martyrs who had perished in the affair of the eagle. And we can see echoes of this in the book of Revelations, can't we? At the Passover, at the time of the evening sacrifice, this feeling became deep and broke into cries for vengeance. Archelaus sent his general to explain and remonstrate, but it was of no avail. The upshot of the riot was the slaughter of 3,000 men and the breaking up of the feast. Well, kind of like what they did when they overthrew the Salafi and the Muslim Brotherhood party in Egypt, because those were the main democratically elected parties. It's to assert the control of the corporations and stuff in that case, though. But and again, tell people who you want you to have the freedom, even from a religious standpoint. But around this time, toward the start of the century, there was Barabbas, right? And he wrote something that looks very, very like the Book of Revelations. I mean, there were some changes later to it when John of Patmos kind of reworked the thing in not as good of Greek as the Aramea of Barabbas, but anyways, Archelaus then went to Rome to secure the establishment of his kingdom by an imperial edict. He carried with him the eloquent orator Archelaus of Damascus, who had been a faithful friend of his father. With him also was his intriguing aunt, Salome, who was secretly in the interest of his brother Herod Antipas. The Jews sent after him a deputation of 500 of their chief men, praying Caesar to abolish the monarchy and let them be governed by their own laws. They made what capital they could of the inauspicious events which had attended the beginning of his government. Perhaps it is to this that Jesus alluded in the parable reported by Luke 19, verses 12 to 27, and also it's notable to notice that the initial Gospels started with 19 chapters, according to what was the source, but a certain nobleman, Eugenhus, a man of birth or rank, the son of Herod, went into a far country, Italy, to receive for himself a kingdom, Judah, and to return. I'm going to try to insert Latin and Greek pronunciations at times, right? But his citizens, the Jews, hated him and sent a message or embassy after him to Augustus Caesar. No czar and no C. It's Ka, saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." While Archelaus was in Rome, Jerusalem was in charge of Sabinus, the Roman procurator of the province. He was a violent, tyrannical, avaricious coward. He made diligent search for the late king's treasure, and did not scruple to take even the sacred treasure. He seemed to devise means to exasperate the Jews. The smoldering fires of fanatic determination to free their country from the Roman yoke were fanned into a flame. When Pentecost came, vast multitudes of men from all parts of the country flocked to Jerusalem, manifestly full of bitterness and ready for mischief. They encamped about the temple and besieged Sabinus, who, from a lofty tower to which he had betaken himself for safety, gave a signal to his troops to issue forth against the besiegers. Much slaughter was on both sides. The Jews were repulsed, but betook themselves to the temple, from the heights of which they rained arrows on the Romans, who could not reach their enemies. The Romans, however, set fire to the cloisters. The roof fell in, and many were precipitated into the flames. Those who were not were either slain by the Romans or threw themselves upon their swords or into the fire. The troops of Sabinus broke into the temple and plundered the sacred treasures, but the Jews, furious at these outrages, continued the siege. Meanwhile, disbanded troops of Herod roamed over the country, plundering and ravaging. The people were driven about, and many of the villages were destroyed. The utmost confusion prevailed in Jerusalem and in the rural districts. Varus, the prefect of Syria, marched to the relief of Sabinus with great force. The insurgents laid down their arms. 2,000 were crucified, and the others sent to Rome for trial. Now, the Romans weren't the first to crucify. I've encountered criticism of the Quran for saying that somebody crucified someone before the Romans. That's silly. How many crucified savior myths were there throughout the world before Rome existed? But notwithstanding the influence brought to bear against him, Archelaus succeeded in securing from Augustus so much of a confirmation of his father Herod's will as to make him not king indeed over the whole country, but ethnarch of Judea, Idumea, and Samaria, one half of that which had been subject to Herod. Archelaus was also promised the royal dignity if he should govern as to deserve it. He retained also the chief cities of Jerusalem, Sebasta, Caesarea, and Joppa. Doesn't Joppa descend from some ancient Egyptian name when they ruled that part? His income was 600 talents. A shekel in the times of Josephus, from whom we have the statements in the text, was worth about 40 cents in gold, and about 3,000 shekels being a talent. The talent was worth about $2,100, and the income of Archelaus must have been about 1,860,000 in gold. And they think, was it Uganda that they recently found what they think of is about 3 trillion worth of gold? Upon his, and they found a similarly large amount in Persia. So upon his return, he seemed disposed in some measure to conciliate the Jews. The only act of his, however, which had much concern with their history, was his displacement of Joasar, whom Herod had made high priest after the affair of the eagle, and the substitution of Eleazar, Joasar's brother. But his general course was tyrannous towards Jews and Samaritans, and the hatred of the Jews for him was increased by his violation of their law. Glyphora was his sister-in-law, having been the wife of his brother Alexander after his father Herod had killed him. Glyphora married Juba, king of Lydia, and when he died, Archelaus divorced his wife Mariamne and married Glyphora. She had 3 children by his brother Alexander, which made it offensive to the Jewish law for Archelaus to marry her. The Jewish people made sufficient interest in Rome to cause Archelaus to be recalled and examined. The result was that Augustus stripped him of his role at the end of 10 years after his appointment, took away his money, and banished him to Vienna in Gaul, where he died the year unknown. Well, if you're banished, that's part of the thing, right? Is you fall into obscurity. But if you've reached that third chakra, right, then that's not so much a thing. Whether the government approves of you or not, you haven't given them the reason for your social image to be, a bad one. In the meantime, the excited state of the public mind rendered it possible for many pretenders and impostors to palm themselves upon the people and add to the general troubles and perplexities. One case was notable. Now, in the Jewish system, we, like the Kabbalah, we would have that be the 6th from the top and the 5th from the bottom. Well, I mean, if you have 11 centers, 5 in the middle, 3 on each side. But, the mere consumption where violence can be from and that sort of thing, and is the lowest center. And but the pelvic center is the one, marriage and social reputation. But anyways, there was in the city of Sidon a young man, by birth a Jew, who had been educated by a Roman freedman. His resemblance to Alexander, one of the sons of Herod, whom he had slain, was so striking that many were ready to attest that he was Alexander, the pseudo-Alexander. Okay. Discovering this, he turned it to his own account and united with an ill man who had great cunning. The story put forth was that he was the real Alexander, brother of Aristobulus, and that those whom Herod sent to destroy him had actually saved him and his brother, slaying other men in their stead. In Crete and in Melos, the Jews believed him the true Alexander and gave him much money. he had the audacity to go to Rome. The Jews of the city, learning that he was coming, went out to meet him, brought him in a royal litter through the streets, and adorned him with ornaments at their own expense. There was a great joy at what they supposed a special providence. So great a stir did this make that the report reached Augustus, who sent for this pseudo-Alexander and his accomplice. The emperor soon detected the imposture. The Prince Alexander had lived in his palace, and Augustus knew his physique. This man's hands and body had all the roughness which belongs to a laboring man, while Alexander's had the smoothness of those who are reared delicately in kings' palaces. And, well, certain conditions when you had human sacrifice, they picked them from those people. Although you could have a person who did work, but they didn't end up with scars and stuff like that. But so Augustus took the young man aside and told him of the discovery, and that he thought the plan too deep to have been concocted by one so young, and that if he would reveal his accomplices, his life should be spared. He did. He was put to the galleys, and his accomplice was put to death. Josephus, Antiquities, Book 17, Chapter 12. Now, when I say that that's what they did with human sacrifice, I'm not saying that that's something that should be done, right? And so again had the hopes of the Jews been raised and dashed. Upon the banishment of Archelaus, Judea, including Samaria, was reduced to the state of a Roman province, governed by a procurator, who was the subordinate of the prefect of Syria. The Roman dependencies were of two classes, those which were governed solely by the emperor, and those which were under the direction of the Senate. The former were the imperial, the latter the senatorian provinces. The former were under the immediate government of legatas, or legatas, some of the blurring and missing of the lines, sorry about that. The latter, proconsuls. The legatus collected the revenues through procurators. The procuratores, casaris. The proconsuls through quaestors. All these officers were men of rank. Publius, Sulpicius, Quirinius, called in the New Testament. Quirinius had been consul AUC 742 or BCE 12. Upon the banishment of Archelaus, he was made prefect of Syria to finish the enrollment. Now, if this guy was 12 BCE, isn't that kind of possibly mixing in the beginning of the making of which had called Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, articulate the tax consequent upon such enrollment. The procurator under Quirinius was Caponius, whose residence was at Caesarea on the coast. Quirinius himself came over to Judea to look after the king's treasures. The enforcement of tax caused great disturbance. To the Jews, it was always most detestable on religious grounds. Jerusalem was kept comparatively quiet by the wise influence of Joasar, who was for a short time again high priest. The rural districts, however, were full of turbulence. There was one Judas who came out of Galilee heading a revolt in the days of the taxing. He's referred to by Gamaliel in a speech before the Sanhedrim, Acts 5:37. So that's what I was talking about earlier. The Barabbas ben Judah. And he wrote something very, very much like the book of Revelations. According to Josephus, Antiquities 18:11. He was a Gaulonite of the city of Gamala, and was called a Galilean probably because of his revolt first broke out in that province. Now there was a reason why the Romans would have executed him and the two thieves that were by him, right? And he knew it was coming, hence that prophecy, right? The watchword of his party, "We have no Lord and Master but God," is a key to the character of this uprising. It was theocratic. God was king. Caesar was not. To give tribute to Caesar was treason to God. Well, that's overreaching in itself, but under God was freedom. Under Caesar, slavery. Well, if the tithing was to pay the salaries of the spiritual leaders, it can quickly devolve into the same thing. But in America, I think if we gave up taxes and paid tithing instead, we could take care of all the needs of the poor. Because honestly, welfare to the rich is almost all the government usage. But and run a collection for some other stuff would be naturally taken care of in terms of what extra would be brought about. And honestly, tithe would be cheaper than tax, wouldn't it? He taught all the scrupulous, external, and ceremonial morality of the Pharisees, while he inspired his followers with an intense love of freedom and a fanatical disregard of life, so that rather than call any man master, they should prefer to surrender themselves and their friends to the death. He was a man of fiery eloquence and attracted large numbers to his standard. They became lawless and committed many depredations before the Roman power suppressed them. Judas was killed, and his immediate followers, who were called Gaulonites, were dispersed. And there's other stories that people can say were worked into the Paul and Jesus account of people that were, attested to during their own generation. But the spirit of this insurrection survived many years and animated the zealots and Sicarii of latter days, to whose obstinate fanaticism, well, devoutness is not quite the same as fanaticism, really. Josephus attributes the subsequent troubles of his country and the destruction of Jerusalem as in 47 of the Common Era. The two sons of Judah renewed the revolt, and for 20 years their younger brother, Menahem, took the lead of a band of desperados, laid siege to Jerusalem, captured the city, assumed the name and state of king, and committed many outrages. When he was slain by the partisans of Eleazar, the high priest, in 66 of the Common Era, Millman's History of the Jews, 252 and 231 are the pages. And let us remember that fanatic comes from the word phantom. And phantom is when you mistake the temple or the preacher or whatever for the message. Yeah, sure, there's maybe obligations of respect or visiting the temple, but the idea that you can't do your prayers if you can't attend the building, or that the messenger is worshipped rather than the other. And the other way is the vicarious sort of fanaticism, that you claim a path, but you don't do the work. And honestly, like all these people that are very, very certain that that they're a Christian or somebody's a Christian, but they're not known through their works. I mean, outside of church. Or even if they go to church at all, most of them don't even go to church. But it was in the procuratorship of Capinus that Jesus was in the temple about a year after Annas had been made high priest. Under his government, it was that the Samaritans polluted the temple after the manner adopted by Josiah toward the idolatrous shrines by secretly bringing dead men's bones and stirring them in the cloisters during the night of the Passover, when the priest had opened the temple gates, as their wont was immediately after midnight. Thenceforward the Samaritans were excluded from the temple, or I think the Samaritans were just blamed for that, but it could be a couple of the Samaritans, and It was another matter of distress and public perplexity, an increase of hate between the Jews and the Samaritans. About 10 of the Common Era, Coponius was succeeded in the procuratorship by M. Ambivius, and he was succeeded by Annius Rufus. Upon the death of Augustus in 14 of the Common Era, his successor, Tiberius, appointed a new procurator, Valerius Gratus, who held office till he was succeeded by Pontius Pilatus. There had been a succession of high priests whose history is not now important. Pilatus, or Pilate, as we know him, found Joseph Caiaphas in the high priest's office. The pronomen of Pilate is lost. Of his early history, we have no authentic information. I think there actually is some, but there is a German legend which represents him as the